Hello and welcome to the Studies of Religion HSC Masterclass. Today we're going to be focusing on religion and belief systems in Australia post-1945. My name is Tarnya Grana and I'm the Religious Education Coordinator at Holy Spirit Catholic College in Lakemba. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the First Nations people of Australia, on whose ancestral homelands we live, learn and work. The homeland of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We celebrate their histories, languages, cultures and spiritualities. We seek to learn and embrace their care and love of country. May we walk gently on this land. Today, a little bit of an overview taken straight from NESA's syllabus for this topic. Now, this is the study of religious expression in Australia's multicultural and multi-faith society since 1945. The study includes an appreciation of Aboriginal spiritualities and their contribution to an understanding of religious beliefs and religious expression in Australia today. Now, the outcomes that we need to address for this unit are really clear. The first one is H1 explains aspects of religion and belief systems. And what that really means is, what is the syllabus content you need to explain? H2 describes and analyses the influence of religion and belief systems on individuals and society. So how does this impact and influence the lives of adherents? H3 examines the influence and expression of religion and belief systems in Australia. So how does the syllabus content shape the lives of adherents? How does it impact their expression of their beliefs? H4 describes and analyses how aspects of religious traditions are expressed by their adherents. So how does the land right movement impact expression on dreaming? H5 evaluates the influence of religious traditions in the life of adherents. Here's where you need to make a judgment on the influence for adherents. H6 organises, analyses and synthesises relevant information about religion from a variety of sources, considering usefulness, validity and bias. So how do you integrate the stimuluses that are provided and the sources? H8 applies appropriate terminology and concepts related to religion and belief systems. So here, are you using the right meta-language appropriately? And H9 coherently and effectively communicates complex information, ideas and issues using appropriate written, oral and graphic forms. So are you constructing your responses in the correct form and structure? Today, our focus on the syllabus will be on issues for Aboriginal spiritualities in relation to the land rights movement. And we will focus on outlining the importance of the following for the land rights movement: native title, Mabo and WIC. The previous syllabus dot points have been covered in other masterclasses, and it would be very appropriate for you to watch those to help you to understand when the syllabus dot points join, which I'll show you later on in some questions from past papers. We'll also come to the bottom of this syllabus, and we're going to focus on the relationship between Aboriginal spiritualities and religious traditions in the process of reconciliation. And what we need to do there is examine the relationship between Aboriginal spiritualities and religious traditions in the process of reconciliation. But as we're dealing with different religious traditions, it will be really important for us to just have a very quick overview on ecumenism and interfaith dialogue initiatives, so we understand a little bit about those religious traditions. The expectations in the HSC for Section 1 are very simple. It is 10 multiple choice questions and 1 5-mark response. Now, multiple choice questions on their own have a variety of different formats and are a skill in answering themselves. Today, during this session, we will look at some past multiple choice questions and to figure out the best way to answer those. The 5-mark response is your very succinct and direct to the point response on this topic. We will analyse a few of these questions as we go. But today we'll begin by outlining the importance of the following for the land rights movement, with a focus on 3 key pieces of legislation. Mabo, native title, and WIC, as has been outlined in our syllabus. Now, the term outline means to sketch in general terms. And as we're only writing a 5-mark response on this, we don't need to have as much detail as we would if we were writing an essay on it. But what we do have to have is an understanding of what the land right movement is. We need to understand what is Mabo, what is native title, what is WIC. But then on top of that, we have to have an analysis of why the land right movement is important. And this then would link to the heart of Aboriginal spirituality and those earlier syllabus dot points, which I like to refer to as ASOC, which is my acronym for Aboriginal spirituality, obligations to land and people, ceremonies and rituals, and kinship. So let's begin by having a little look at what the land is used for in Australia. So in Australia, there is a variety of different ways that we find land. Freehold land is land that's been bought from the Crown. The Crown being the government that holds that land right. Leasehold, which is land leased from the Crown. Mineral leases and licenses, where land has been leased to mining companies. We have native title, which has come about after the 1992 Mabo decision and the Native Title Act in 1993, where land could at this point be owned by traditional owners. And we have Crown land, which is land controlled by Crown, state or federal governments. You'll also see on my screen, I have a few key terms here. So the term terra nullius is a very important term for this topic, and we will get into that in a little while. So what is the land rights movement? Land is at the heart of Aboriginal dreaming. The land rights movement is a religio-political movement that seeks to ensure the inherent native rights of Aboriginal peoples to their land and to ensure their religious, spiritual, and cultural integrity is preserved. It is a connection to the dreaming. To reclaim land is a way to reconnect with culture and dreaming stories. All relationships with Aboriginal communities are determined through relationships with land. Their identity, life, and spirit are bound up in it. And after World War II, remembering that we're focusing on post-1945, attitudes to assimilation changed. And in 1972, when self-determination became the dominant policy in Indigenous affairs. What I have for you here on the screen is, I guess you could say, a number of initiatives that had come about in the pursuit of justice, which shaped the political landscape here in Australia. The first one in 1963 is the Yirrkala petition. Now, the Yirrkala people of the Grove Peninsula in the Northern Territory presented a petition written on bark to the Commonwealth Parliament protesting their concerns about their land being taken away by a mining company. In 1965, we have the Freedom Riders, where 30 people led by Charles Perkins, one of 2 Aboriginal students at Sydney University, undertook a bus tour of northern and western New South Wales towns to protest against racial discrimination. Their tour focused national attention on racism that had been generated and supported by the so-called White Australia policy. Indigenous peoples were often denied service in shops, separated from others in cinemas, banned from hotels and clubs, and excluded from swimming pools and being used by other people. 1966, we get the Wave Hill strike, and the Gurindjinji people went on strike to press their claim to part of the Wave Hill pastoral station in the Northern Territory. An elder of the group at that time led what is known as the Wave Hill mob. They instigated the modern land rights movement in 1966. After a heated dispute with cattle barons and leaders at the time, the Whitlam federal government passed the first land rights legislation in 1975, which provided certain parcels of land to particular Aboriginal communities. In 1967, we get the referendum, where Australians voted overwhelmingly to propose changes to the Constitution so that Aboriginal peoples would be counted in the census, and the Commonwealth would have the power to make laws regarding Aboriginal peoples. In 1972, we get the establishment of the Tent Embassy. So what happened on Australia Day in 1972, a tent appeared on the lawns in the front of the Parliament House of the time. This was called the Aboriginal Embassy, and it was here that the Aboriginal flag became a national symbol. The embassy became the focal point for protest against the denial of rights for Aboriginal peoples, their living conditions, and the lack of action in Aboriginal affairs by federal and state governments. It caused great embarrassment to the government as national and overseas television screens showed the protesters. After a ban came through, police pulled up and started to pull down the tents. But all that did was incite more peoples from all over Australia to come and re-erect their tents. There were protest marches all around Australia, and the government was surprised by the amount of public support for this particular cause, Aboriginal land rights. And in 1992, we have the Redfern speech, which was a very important speech supporting the rights of Indigenous people. But every claim, unfortunately, went unheard until 1992 with the Mabo decision. In June 1992, 5 Indigenous plaintiffs from the Murray Islands in the Torres Strait Islands set in motion the most significant legal challenge to Australia. Native title claimed to re-establish rights to land that had been lived on by Eddie Mabo. This was known as the Mabo Judgment. The Supreme Court specified that if rights to the land have been continually exercised by Indigenous Australians and those rights have not been sold or granted to settlers, then those Indigenous Australians are the legal owners of those rights. Now, this High Court ruling was very significant. This rejected the notion of terra nullius. Terra nullius was a term used to describe land belonging to no one. The Mabo decision has made it very clear that native title had been extinguished over freehold land. Most private land in Australia is freehold. It means at that point, there was no fears that suburban homes would be at risk from land claims. But what it did do was allow Aboriginal peoples to now make claims to get land back that they could prove that they had been using. This led to the next piece of legislation with the Native Title Act in 1993. The Keating Labor government passed the Native Title Act. This legislation came into force on the 1st of January 1994 and recognised the existence of Aboriginal peoples' native title in Australian federal law. It aimed to codify the Mabo decision and implemented strategies to facilitate the process of granting native title. One of the key provisions of this act was to set up a native title tribunal to register, hear, and determine native title claims. There are 2 prerequisites necessary in order to claim native title. Firstly, it needs to be proven that native title has not been extinguished by freehold title and that native title is not inconsistent with the way the land is currently used. Basically, this means that native title could only be claimed for vacant Crown land, for example, land owned by the government, and land that may be being leased by the Crown. If the land had been bought by an individual, then it's what we would be called freehold. It was owned by an individual and it could not be claimed. The Native Title Tribunal, since its formation, has received almost 500 claims from Aboriginal peoples from the country. The Act has provisions for regional agreements in which native title claimants, that is, native title representative bodies and industry groups such as pastoralists or miners, can negotiate with each other and come to a generally accepted agreement about the use and management of land. What this did is allow many people the traditional right to access of the land to use or occupy. So a positive outcome here was also the establishment of a National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Fund, which helped dispossessed people acquire their land. Even though native title is an important step in the history of Aboriginal self-determination, some activists argue that the current provisions for native title don't go far enough. They think that in many cases, native title does not ensure access to sacred sites. But what we are seeing today is more and more claims being made to the appropriate organisations. And there has been an institution of some economic and social independence when organisations have been supporting them to help them preserve their culture in a way that is deemed appropriate. This is followed in 1996 by the Wick decision. So 1 year after Mabo, the Wick peoples, later joined by the Theore people, claimed native title over some traditional lands on the Cape York Peninsula. You'll notice on the map on the screen, it's the little green box at the very top of Queensland. This piece of legislation is known as the Wick Peoples versus Queensland. The Wick decision was handed down by the High Courts in December 1996 and determined that native title could coexist with other rights on the land held under pastoral leases. Now, pastoral leases are things like farming land. The High Court also decided in areas of dispute where the rights of the leasehold title holder cannot be reconciled with the native title holder, the needs of the leasehold title holder would override the native title holder. So what that means is if the pastoralist and the native title cannot exist together, that they cannot function appropriately, then the leaseholder would extinguish the rights of native title. Now, as the pastoral leases vary, each case must be judged on their own merits. In 1998, we get the first of the Native Title Amendment Acts, and this one is particularly important because it outlined a 10-point plan. In 1996, the Liberal National Party introduced an amendment to the 1993 Native Title Act. It was designed to help put the Wick ruling into place and make it practice more workable. The main feature of the legislation was to transfer the power to upgrade the leasehold title to freehold title from federal to state government. So this would make it easier to extinguish native title. There was also a sunset clause which prevented Aboriginal peoples from making native title claims beyond a cut-off date to help avoid confusion and for the law to be applied with certainty. This therefore cut off many Aboriginal groups to claim native title under these parameters. Now, managing land claims, as you would understand, is a very big and very important part of our society. There's been further native title amendments since establishment, and many improvements have been made to manage and streamline claims. The High Court judgment of Mabo, native title, and Wick decisions show a fundamental change in the way Australian law reviews the relationship between Aboriginal peoples and the land, and dispels the notion that Australia was ever a land that belonged to no one. Native title claims are made by application to the federal court, and once an application is filed, it must be successfully registered with the National Native Title Tribunal. The Native Title Act does four major things of relevance to the department. It recognises native title rights exist in Australia where those rights have not been extinguished. It validates certain past actions carried out by governments, and includes a Future Act regime that allows for governments to continue undertaking certain activities on the Crown estate where native title has not been extinguished. And it states that compensation may be owing to native title holders for certain past and future acts. As with everything when we look at in religion, land rights claims are dynamic and they're living. And in your 5-mark responses, it is really important that you stay up to date with any changes that may be made in relation to native title claims. So here's just a few examples. In 2022, the Federal Court formally recognised the Waka Waka people as native title holders over 1,180 square kilometres of land from the Bunya Mountains in southern Queensland to Gayndah in the South Burnett River catchment, encompassing the town of Cherbourg. Now, Cherbourg was established in the early 1900s as a place of internment for Indigenous people who were forcibly removed from their land. So this was a wonderful win for the Waka Waka people. In July 2023, native title was granted to the Djuri people in South Australia's mid-north, granting the Djuri people more than 15,000 square kilometres encompassing Burra, Clare and Uluru. The native title area covers about 15,000 square kilometres. In March 2024, traditional owners from Western Australia's Gascoyne are celebrating a native title win almost 30 years in the making, as their claim over a piece of country the size of Singapore is officially enshrined. Aboriginal families from across the state's northwest were recognised as the native title holders of the Medina claim on pastoral land more than 900 kilometres north of Perth. And of course, one that we may have all seen and all know, in 2019, Uluru, one of Australia's most important icons, as we can see from the picture of Ayers Rock there, became a sacred site for local Aboriginal people, the Anangu. Now, the Anangu had lobbied for decades for the rights to their traditional lands. In October 1985, the Hawke government handed back the title deeds for the Uluru Kata Tajuta National Park. And it's not until November 2019 that we see the Uluru climb closed to help protect this sacred site. Now, these examples are just some of many that have occurred over the years and will make excellent examples for you to put in your 5-mark responses if you have questions on land rights claims. In the 2020 HSC, we see the year after the climb was closed, these questions come into the HSC. It says, use the following to answer the questions 5 and 6. And we see a picture of Ayers Rock and says, please don't climb. The questions themselves focus on why the climbing being closed was important to the traditional owners and how was the closure of Uluru to climbers significant for the land rights movement. In this particular case, why closing Uluru to climbers was important because it acknowledged obligations of land and people. And how was the closure of Uluru to climbers significant for the land rights movement? It provided an example of traditional and Australian law working together. In our 2022 HSC, we have which of the following was a result of the WIC decision? And in 2019, which of the following was an outcome of the Mabo decision? Both of these questions are content-related questions. You just need to know what each of those pieces of legislation were about. So for the WIC decision, it was pastoral leases could coexist with remaining native title rights. And for the Mabo decision, the legal concept of terra nullius was re-examined and overturned. In the 2023 HSC, we have a 5-mark question 11, explain the relationship between the dreaming and the land rights movement. What you have is 19 lines, which means you have to write succinctly and with purpose to answer this question. The verb, explain, asks you to use cause and effect. So what we need to see here is some really good examples for you to explain the relationship between the dreaming and the land rights movement. You need to address what the land rights movement is and refer explicitly to the 3 key movements and pieces of legislation that we've addressed already today. But this particular question asks you to relate key aspects of the dreaming from the earlier syllabus areas and show how the land rights movement cases have helped to get access to the land. That is essential. In our second part of the syllabus, we're going to look at the relationship between Aboriginal spiritualities and religious traditions in the process of reconciliation. The syllabus dot point specifically asks us to examine the relationship between Aboriginal spiritualities and religious traditions in the process of reconciliation. And for us to understand that, we're going to start by looking at the above syllabus dot points of ecumenism and interfaith dialogue briefly. Ecumenism refers to the movement towards religious unity amongst Christian denominations. Unity does not mean uniformity. It is not about combining all denominations into one, but rather an acknowledgement that their unity in Christ outweighs their diversity in practice and beliefs. In contrast to the historical conflict between Christian denominations, ecumenism is leading them to work, worship, and dialogue together. Interfaith dialogue is a formal discussion aimed towards developing greater mutual understanding between different religious traditions. It rejects the belief that all religions are the same, and it is not an attempt to unify different religious traditions, but while respecting the diversity of beliefs, it allows different religions to come to a better appreciation of the uniqueness of each other. If you want further information on ecumenism and interfaith dialogue, I suggest that there are masterclasses that focus solely on this content, but also the R-Research podcast has 2 wonderful editions on this very content that are very easy to listen to and are available on Spotify and Apple. So what is reconciliation? The reconciliation movement involves justice, recognition, and healing, moving forward to a better understanding of the past and recognising how it affects Indigenous people today. It involves honouring the first Australians and adopting practical methods to address disadvantages and improving Indigenous people's future position. There have been some very key events in the reconciliation movement that we need to address before we get into some of the questions today. In 1986, Pope John Paul II addressed the Aboriginal peoples. In 1975, we have the Whitlam government passing on the first land rights legislation. In 1991, we have the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation being set up here in Australia, promoting a process of reconciliation between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and the wider Australian community. CAR, as its acronym is known, works towards a united Australia which respects this land of ours, values the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage, and provides justice and equity for all. In 1997, we get the Bringing Them Home report, a report focusing on the stolen generation. The Bringing Them Home report, tabled in federal parliament, addressed the impact of the forced removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. This was a pivotal moment in the healing journey of many stolen generation members, acknowledging their stories of being taken from their families. The resulting trauma has been passed down to children and grandchildren, contributing to many of the issues faced in Indigenous communities today. The majority of the Bringing Them Home report recommended many different things, and unfortunately, many of them have still not today been implemented. In 1998, we get the National Sorry Day. Now, it was first held on the 26th of May in 1998, 1 year after the release of the Bringing Them Home report. It is held every year on the 26th of May to remember and recognise all those who were affected by the stolen generation. National Sorry Day acknowledges the impact of forcible removal policies on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians and the negative impact on the government policies, practices and attitudes towards the Indigenous people of Australia throughout history. In 2000, we had the Walk for Reconciliation. On Saturday, the 27th of May 2000, at the Sydney Opera House, the CAR presented its final proposal for a national document for reconciliation. The next day, on the 28th of May, more than 250,000 people walked for reconciliation across the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It is estimated that during Corroboree 2000 and National Reconciliation Week, hundreds of thousands of people throughout Australia walked across bridges for reconciliation. The walk symbolised Australia's desire to move towards reconciliation. In 2008, we have Prime Minister Kevin Rudd making a formal apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples, particularly to the stolen generation whose lives had been blighted by the past government policies of forced child removal and Indigenous assimilation. The apology was the new Parliament's first order of business. Rudd became the first Australian Prime Minister to publicly apologise to the stolen generations on behalf of the Australian federal government. The apology to Indigenous peoples of Australia was seen as an important step towards reconciliation between Aboriginal Australians and non-Aboriginal Australians. The apology acknowledged the government and past government's responsibility in policies, practices, and attitudes that have discriminated against, isolated, and marginalised Indigenous people. The apology set the vision for a future where all Australians, whatever their origins, are truly equal partners with equal opportunities and an equal stake in shaping the next generation of the history of Australia. In 2017, after the National Constitutional Convention, we see the creation of the Uluru Statement of the Heart. Now, the Uluru Statement seeks a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. The term Makarrata is a Yolngu word that expresses the idea of two parties coming together after a struggle and healing the divisions of the past, to move forward from conflict and begin the healing process. But first, there must be acknowledgement of the harm that was done. The Uluru Statement of the Heart is a very important document and today has been endorsed by many different religious traditions. When it comes to reconciliation, there are some key organisations such as ANTAR, Australians for Native, Title and Reconciliation. Now, this is a national advocacy organisation dedicated specifically to the rights and overcoming the disadvantage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. ANTAR is the main non-Indigenous organisation for reconciliation. ANTAR is a church-supported community-based organisation and is one of the most prominent community groups advocating Indigenous rights. ANTAR seeks justice, rights and respects for Australians' First People, and its focus is on challenging and changing the attitudes and behaviours of non-Indigenous Australians so that the rights and cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are respected and reaffirmed across all sections of society. Now, in this part of the syllabus, we're asked to examine the relationship between Christianity and reconciliation. Now, reconciliation has become an important expression of spirituality in Australia, and most Christian churches hold that Aboriginal beliefs are not entirely incompatible with the Christian faith. Most Christian churches have developed groups that represent Indigenous Australians, such as in the Uniting Church, we have the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress. In the Catholic tradition, we have National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council, and the Anglican Church has the National Torres Strait Islander Anglican Church. Each of those run different initiatives and different prayer groups and sessions to help work towards reconciliation. As it's a living and dynamic religion, each year it would probably best to have a little bit of a look and see what these organisations are focusing on for that year, so you can discuss with more certainty in your question about initiatives that are running within different Christian organisations. If we examine the relationship between Islam and reconciliation, we see that Islamic groups have also made public statements about reconciliation and issues such as native title, and have issued a formal apology to the stolen generations and for land rights. The Australian Federation of Islamic Councils have made a number of statements supporting reconciliation, including calls on the Australian government to recognise this fact by accepting the Uluru Statement of the Heart as a starting point to responding to the injustices of our First Nations people and what they have suffered. The Muslim Women Australia support National Reconciliation Week each year as part of respect and unity between non-Indigenous Australians and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, in recognition of respect for traditional owners of the land and its people, and valuing equity and justice for all Australians. Buddhism and reconciliation. Now, the Buddhist Peace Fellowship have made public statements supporting reconciliation, and issues such as native title, a formal apology to the stolen generation, and for their land rights. The Australian Buddhist community states, "We support constitutional recognition for Indigenous Australians in the preamble and the body of the Australian Constitution. Recognition and acknowledgement of Indigenous Australian people's culture, past and present, in our Constitution would show our valued place as part of our national identity. We believe these changes will bring our Constitution into accord with the values of contemporary Australian society." Judaism and reconciliation. The New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies supports the goals of Reconciliation Week and the Uluru Statement of the Heart. The Jewish community has strongly supported the Week of Prayer for Aboriginal reconciliation. The lead lawyer for the Mabo case was Jewish and represented the attitudes of many Jews on the issue of reconciliation. In 2000, the Executive Council of the Australian Jewry also urged the Australian government to implement recommendations made by a national inquiry into the separation of Aboriginal children from their families, stressing crimes of silence should not be repeated. In 2005, as a Jewish community initiative, the Shalom Gumrada program awards scholarships to First Nations students studying at the University of New South Wales to reside at Shalom College, a Jewish residential college on the campus. In 2006, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry affirmed the importance of reconciliation and called on the government to reduce disadvantages faced by Indigenous people. In 2010, the new Jewish Board of Deputies published a book which documented a joint initiatives of the Jewish and First Nations communities, hand in hand, Jewish people working together. Hinduism and reconciliation. The Hindu Council of Australia joined faith leaders at the celebration of the 2019 UN World Interfaith Harmony Week to stop and listen to the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in hope of reconciliation and healing our nation's broken heart. The Hindu Council of Australia has also endorsed the Uluru Statement of the Heart. So some questions on reconciliation from past papers. In the 2022 HSC, we get a statement question. Now, these are sort of cheeky questions because they're like 2 in 1. So you have to get 2 questions right to get the correct answer. So statement 1, religious traditions do not emphasize the process of reconciliation as it draws people away from traditional worship. Statement 2, the Week of Prayer for Reconciliation is an initiative of faith communities in Australia committed to restoring relationships with Indigenous peoples. Which of the following is correct? The answer is D. So as we have seen, different religious traditions have been engaging in the reconciliation process. So that statement is false. Now, the Week of Prayer for Reconciliation and National Reconciliation Week are held each year between the 27th of May and the 3rd of June. These dates commemorate 2 significant milestones in the reconciliation journey: the anniversaries of the successful 1967 referendum and the Mabo decision, and therefore that statement is true. In the 2021 HSC, question 1 was, what did the Native Title Act in 1993 recognise? And again, this was another question where you just needed to understand what the purpose of the Native Title Act was about. Question 10, which of the following is correct? And here you have the different land rights cases, the legislation, so you need to understand what they are to get them correct. And in this case, Native Title Act recognises the land and water rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And which of the following is correct? The Native Title Amendment Act in 1998 empowered states and territories to legislate their own native title procedures. In our 2020 HSC, what was established by the 1998 Native Title Amendment Act? And question 10, we seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and make a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds and their culture will be a gift to their country. Uluru Statement of the Heart, 2017, National Constitutional Convention. According to the source, how would constitutional reform contribute to the progress of reconciliation in Australia? Again, with question 8, we need to understand what was the Native Title Amendment Act. And if we narrow this one down, we know when we see terra nullius, we know that's the Mabo case, so we can rule that one out straight away. The rights of leaseholders could override native title, or the rights of freehold property owners were recognised, or is it about native title coexisting with the rights of leaseholders? Well, this particular question in 2020 was a bit of a tricky one, and they ended up paying both B and D as the correct answer. For the Uluru Statement of the Heart question, according to the source, how would constitutional reform contribute to the progress of reconciliation in Australia? The answer was D. It would enable Aboriginal people to gain control of the reconciliation process. In the 2018 HSC, we have another statement question. Now, statement 1 is in the Wick decision, the High Court first recognised that the term terra nullius was not an appropriate description of the land. And statement 2, the Bringing Them Home report, was the first legal recognition of Aboriginal native title. In 2017, which of the following best recognises the importance of the land in Aboriginal spirituality? For the 2018 question, the answer is B. Both statements are false. We know in the Wick decision that terra nullius was not overruled. We know that it was about coexistence between pastoral leases and native title. And the Bringing Them Home report was not the first legal recognition of Aboriginal native title. Now, the importance of land rights and Aboriginal spirituality, the answer here obviously is reconciliation. It's not protectionism, which was a policy set up in the 50s to help with the idea of protecting people by taking them from their homes. It's not ecumenism, and it's not assimilation. In the 2015 HSC, we have another statement question. You'll notice there are a lot of statement questions relating to this part of the syllabus because it's very easy to ask these questions because there is a lot of legislation and differences in them. Statement 1 was the 1992 Mabo decision applied to land lived on continuously by Aboriginal people. And statement 2, the 1996 Wick decision allowed pastoral leases to extinguish native title. The answer for this one is D. Statement 1 is true. The 1992 Mabo decision applied to land on continuously by Aboriginal people. However, statement 2 is incorrect because the 1996 Wick decision allowed pastoral leases to coexist with native title and only be extinguished in cases where they could not work together. In 2021, the 5-mark question was how have religious traditions engaged with the process of reconciliation? Now, I have the marking criteria and a sample answer here taken from NESA. And what you'll notice with this question is to get 5 marks, you have to provide a detailed and accurate explanation of how religious traditions have engaged with the process of reconciliation and integrate clear, relevant, and accurate terminology. Now, the how, which is the verb for the question, really asks you to analyse how religious traditions have engaged with the process of Aboriginal reconciliation by using clear examples. When it comes to religious traditions, we see a bossy S there, which means we have to look at more than one. We have to look at examples of initiatives, and we need to show an understanding of reconciliation and that it's an ongoing progress. In 2016, we have an interesting question with a stimulus. The stimulus is from Dr. Jackie Higgins, an Aboriginal rights archivist, who said, "We must respect each other's right to choose a collective destiny and the opportunity to develop the legal and political rights for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples so that we may enjoy the right to maintain our culture, our heritage, and our land as United Australia. With reference to the quotation, outline the importance of the land rights movement to Aboriginal Australians. Now, when you get this stimulus, think back to the Year 11 syllabus and that link here with the inextricable connection of the land and the dreaming and identity. What do you have to do to answer this question? Well, you need to integrate words and phrases from the stimulus into your response. That's how you make reference to the quotation. You need to make specific reference to the syllabus content, in this case, land rights movement. Show an understanding of what the land rights movement is and have some examples of the key pieces of legislation that we've covered with Mabo, native title, and WIC. Outline the importance and make a judgment on why these pieces of legislation are important. And you have to do this all in around 12, 15 lines, no more than the 19. You need to be succinct and purposeful. Well, I hope that this helped you a little bit to understand the land rights movement and the reconciliation process. And I wish you all the very best of luck in your studies. And there are many other webinars that you can log on to help you address the other syllabus dot points in the Sydney Catholic Schools Masterclass channel. Thank you, everyone.